All right, welcome back to ABA exam review and our latest BCBA exam practice question video where we're going through a set of questions together and breaking them down. If you're new to the channel, welcome. If you're returning, welcome back. Please like and subscribe. Check out behavioranalyststudy.com for all of our study materials, including our combo pack. As always, when you pass, let us know so we can include you in the Sunday shout out. Work hard, study hard. Let's get going. You asked your behavior technician to grab some confidential records from a client's house and bring them to you on Monday, but don't specify further. You coincidentally run into this technician over the weekend and see that the records are sitting on the passenger seat of the car. What should you do? Okay, clearly an ethics question, a privacy question. We've got these confidential records where your technician is supposed to bring them to you on Monday. You run into them over the weekend and you see them sitting on the passenger seat of their car. Now, clearly, it's not okay, right? And so with ethical questions, a lot of times they're so black and white that when you get a question, it's going to be the details that you really need to pay attention to, because a lot of ethical scenarios in the ethical code are based on details. In this case, you told them to grab the records from the house and bring them to you on Monday, but didn't say anything further. So you didn't specify how they should carry them, where they should put them. You didn't remind them of privacy concerns, anything like that. You just said, bring the confidential records. And while fair that the technician should be aware of these things, it's still our duty as BCBAs to ensure the privacy of what is ultimately our responsibility, which is the client. So if this situation happens where you run into the technician over the weekend and the records are sitting on the passenger seat of the car, given you didn't specify, what should you do? A, take the records from the technician right then and there. Sure, you're there, you might as well take the records, right? But you also, as the analyst, need to address this privacy concern. And that's a big part of being a behavior analyst. It's not just designing treatments. A lot of your job is things like training parents and training technicians and making sure your technicians are always in compliance. And when they're not, it's your job to retrain them. So yes, you should take the records, but what else should you do? What's more important than that? B, explain to the technician the importance of keeping client information confidential. B is just a better answer. It's more important in that moment that you tell them the importance of keeping client information confidential, because that's what we're really worried about. They could give you the records at any time. They could still give them to you Monday. What they need to be concerned with, though, is confidentiality, which is a huge deal in our field. Confidentiality is everything. It's a very, very important piece of the ethical code. C, reprimand the technician on Monday for exposing confidential information. Well, it's a little harsh. You don't know if they exposed anything, and you didn't really specify. They might not have known. Again, they should know, but it's still your job to make sure it's confidential. So C is a little harsh, and then D is way too harsh. Report the technician to the board. Whenever there's an ethical scenario where no obvious harm has been done, the first step is to try to resolve it amicably. It's always the first step. So if you notice an ethical issue and no harm has been done, you always first try to resolve it before you take more drastic measures. So the number one thing you should do, the first thing you should do, is explain to the technician the importance of keeping client information confidential. Privacy and confidentiality are so important for our clients and in our field. It's a very, very important thing that you must always reinforce in your team. A behavior technician reaches out to you one day and informs you that the parents were upset that hand-over-hand prompting was being utilized. After you sit down with the parents, they do not want hand-over-hand prompts, but they still allow physical prompting only as necessary. You're going to implement what type of prompting? Now, this is a dead giveaway here, right? We're talking a lot about physical prompting and hand-over-handing, and there are some parents who aren't comfortable with hand-over-hand prompts, and that's just their prerogative, and we've got to work with inside those confines as much as possible. So this analyst or you have done the right thing, right? You've gotten feedback from your technician, and you sat down with the parents, and you've developed an alternative plan, because they will allow physical prompting as necessary. So if you're only going to physically prompt as necessary, what does that most closely resemble? A, full physical. Well, they don't want full physical, right? They don't necessarily want us to jump to hand over hand immediately. You only want physical prompting as necessary. What about B, partial physical? Well, B, with a partial physical prompt, you're still physically prompting the first attempt, right? Essentially. Okay. So you're still physically prompting, not as necessary, but that is the strategy. Physical, partial physical is still physical. It's still a physical prompt as the strategy. If we look at C, graduated guidance, this is much more in line with what they want. Graduated guidance, we use only as much physical prompting as necessary and only when necessary, and then we fade immediately. Still intrusive, still physical, but it's a lot less intrusive than full and partial physical. Now, is partial physical and full physical perhaps part of graduated guidance? Possibly, but graduated guidance is much more systematic. We started much more slowly, and it's only as necessary, and it's faded immediately. So it's a happy medium between not using physical prompting and meeting the parents' demands. And then D, most to least prompting, would be starting at full physical, which the parents don't want us to do. So what are you going to implement to meet the needs of this particular stakeholder? Well, you're going to implement C, graduated guidance. Walter, a behavior analyst, supervises Jesse, a behavior technician. Walter will observe Jesse once or twice per month and provide training and feedback during those sessions. When it comes time to fill out Jesse's performance review sheet, Walter assigns it to another member of his team and signs off on it as his own review. What is wrong with what Walter has done? You'd be very surprised at the things that behavior analysts will make other people do and then claim as their own. We cannot do that. Ethically, we cannot plagiarize. We cannot claim others' work as our own. We've got to give credit where credit is due. And on top of that, Walter is the supervisor. Walter needs to be conducting this review. So what is the issue here? Well, there's several things. So let's see. Well, we know Walter observes him once or twice a month and provides training and feedback during those sessions. That seems okay, right? That seems like a fine way to go about supervision. The problem comes when it's time to fill out his performance review. Walter doesn't do it, and then he signs off on it as his own. So what is wrong with what Walter has done? Hey, nothing. This is good supervision. Well, the in-person supervision is fine, once or twice per month. Sometimes that's all we can do. He's giving training, he's giving feedback. That seems okay. But the second part is not fine. B, Walter should supervise Jesse more than twice a month. Well, depending on the caseload and the client's schedule, it might not be possible. And as long as Jesse, the technician, is getting his hours, it seems okay. C, Walter should not claim someone else's work as his own in the review process. Yeah, on top of Walter being the one who should be doing the performance review, he can't especially claim somebody else's work as his own and then make it his review, right? He's just violating a lot of different things he shouldn't be doing. So C looks good. D, Walter should save training for after supervision sessions. No, supervision is an excellent time for training. You're in the moment. You can demonstrate. You can show them. You can model. Supervision is a great time for training. The problem is Walter has claimed someone else's work as his own on top of not actually being the one to do the review, which is the supervisor. He should be doing that review. Your friend wants to stop biting their nails. You recommend that each time they bite their nails, they record the time and antecedent to biting their nails, and that they do this for a week. What are you recommending? All right, so this is a self-management procedure, and we know with self-management, there's several different strategies that go along with self-management. In this case, let's look at what we want them to do. Well, you recommend that they record the time and antecedent to biting their nails. They're basically becoming aware of this behavior, and they're starting to take data on this behavior. So what are you recommending? A, self-monitoring. Well, of course, right? They're monitoring their behavior. They're becoming aware of their behavior. They're becoming aware of what they're doing, and they're starting to take data on it. Now, B, self-evaluation. They're not evaluating anything yet. They're not evaluating outcomes or progress or themselves against somebody else. They're simply monitoring their behavior. C, self-talk. They're not talking to themselves, right? They're not giving verbal cues and prompts to themselves. They're simply observing and recording. And then D, self-reinforcement. Again, there's no reinforcement schedule in place. There's no consequences in place. Monitoring when they bite their nails, they record the time and antecedent. And then when they have this data, just like a client we would work with, then we start to intervene and we go on to things like self-evaluation and this kind of thing. But as of right now, all you're recommending is just to self-monitor. Which of the following answer choices best demonstrates circular reasoning? Now, circular reasoning is one of those three main ideas and mentalisms, right? We have hypothetical constructs, explanatory fictions, and circular reasoning. Our hypothetical constructs are the terms and ideas that we create, things like ego and frustration. We acknowledge they exist, but they're still hypothetical constructs. Explanatory fictions are when we use those constructs as the cause to explain the cause of behavior, all right? And then circular reasoning is when we use the cause and effect interchangeably. So the cause is the effect, and the effect is the cause. And for the mentalisms, you want to make it that simple. You don't want to complicate it. So we're looking for circular reasoning here. So A, Brian is experiencing extreme anger. Well, this would just be a hypothetical construct, right? We're not explaining anything away. We're just saying he's angry. That is just a hypothetical construct of Brian's state of being. B, due to Jane's test anxiety, she failed her last exam. So now we're attributing Jane's outcome to a construct, anxiety, which makes it an explanatory fiction. We're explaining away the behavior. We're explaining that the cause of the behavior or the outcome is due to the construct. And that's what makes it an explanatory fiction. C, Lane has a learning disability and struggles to read. Lane struggled to read when he was younger and received the learning disability diagnosis. So here's our circular reasoning, right? Lane has a learning disability, and so he struggles to read, right? And why does he struggle to read? Well, he has a learning disability diagnosis. So it's gone round and round and round. Okay, what came first, the chicken or the egg? And we're just going round in circles. We're not solving anything here, right? Well, Lane struggles to read. He has a learning disability. Well, since he has a learning disability, he obviously struggles to read. You're just going to go in circles. There's no solution. There's no change. We're just going in circles. This is circular reasoning. And then D, Joey is happy because his best friend is coming in town. Well, it's a state of being, right? But we're not attributing the cause to the being, so it's not an explanatory fiction. His best friend is coming in town, so he's probably feeling the emotion of happy. He's probably experiencing that private event. So the circular reasoning here is C. Lane has a learning disability and struggles to read. Lane struggled to read when he was younger and received the learning disability diagnosis. A research assistant spent their weekend collecting data from a support group from recovering alcoholics. The research assistant compiled the data and then presented it to the principal investigator in charge of the project. The principal investigator told the research assistant that he wasn't sure if the data was believable. Believability is tied most closely to what? When we think of good data, we think of accuracy, reliability, validity, and we should also think of IOA. Think of IOA and believability as the same thing. Okay, if we have accurate data, which is measuring the true value, if we have reliable data, which is being able to replicate that measurement, if we have valid data, which is being able to measure what we're trying to measure, the target behavior, and then we have believability. In other words, we have inter-observer agreement. And inter-observer agreement is when two or more people measure the same thing and then compare. So if this research assistant compiled data and then presented it to the investigator in charge, and the principal investigator said, well, I'm not sure it's believable, the principal investigator is not saying, well, I don't think you're accurate. You may have measured what the true value was. I'm not saying you're not reliable. I'm not saying you couldn't measure this again. I'm not saying it's not valid where we weren't measuring what we intended to. I'm saying I don't believe it. We need more people looking at it. We need more inter-observer agreement. So what the principal investigator might do is spend his weekend collecting the same data and comparing. And then that would lead to more believability if they both got the same data. So believability is tied most closely to inter-observer agreement. Tracy puts out a picture of Wendy's, a picture of McDonald's, and a picture of Sonic, then hands her client a picture of Wendy's and says, match it. Tracy is implementing what type of intervention? Okay, pretty straightforward question here, right? More of a teaching question because we have field of three, Wendy's, McDonald's, Sonic. Tracy hands her client Wendy's picture matched to Wendy's picture. Clearly what? Identical matching to sample. So we use matching to sample, right? Most commonly with stimulus equivalence. I guess what would be the main difference, right, between identical and symbolic matching to sample? And that's what is always the most difficult part about explaining this type of question, right? Because it's a very simple question. Obviously, we're matching identical Wendy's to Wendy's, okay? But what's symbolic matching? Well, symbolic matching is how we test that stimulus equivalence, right? So if I match identical pictures of Wendy to Wendy's, and then I took that pictures of Wendy's and said, well, go match it to the restaurant, and they ran up to the physical restaurant, that's symbolic matching to sample. And that's the key difference between the two matching to samples. It's really not more complicated than that, but you should know the difference. And why? Because these are tied to stimulus equivalence, which you need to know, and which gives people difficulty on the exam. So the more you can understand about stimulus equivalence, the better off you are. It's clearly not functional communication training. We're not teaching them to vocalize or verbalize anything. We're just ID matching. Picture of Wendy's to picture of Wendy's. A toddler picks up a ball and throws it. She then picks up a round plastic item and throws that as well. These stimuli are considered part of what type of stimulus class? So we have multiple types of stimulus classes. We have temporal, formal, functional, arbitrary, and stimuli can be part of multiple types of classes. So temporal is what? Temporal is just saying when it happens in time, essentially. Is it an antecedent? Is it a consequence? Well, the ball and the round plastic item are both antecedents, right? See the ball, see the round item, you throw it. So they are both antecedents. They're both part of a temporal class. What about formal? Well, formal is how they look. Well, ball is round. The round plastic item is round. Their form is similar. They can be considered part of a formal class. It's topographical class, right? And then functional. What does it evoke? Well, in both cases, the ball and the round plastic item evoke the function of throwing. So they're also a part of a functional stimulus class. They wouldn't be part of an arbitrary stimulus class because they're not arbitrary. They have very similar characteristics, evoking the same response. So these stimuli are considered what part of a stimulus class? Well, temporal, they're both antecedents. Formal, they're both round. And functional, they both evoke the same outcome. So what type? Well, D, all the above. Excellent. Thanks for watching. Check out behavioranalyststudy.com. Don't forget we have our 5th edition task list study guide ongoing where we're breaking down each section, so be sure to check that out. As always, let us know when you pass. Work hard, study hard. See you soon.